The sky was a bruised purple, the kind of color that meant a storm was more than just a whisper on the horizon. Ethan Cole tightened the strap on his duffel bag, glancing once more at the small charter plane sitting on the rain-slick runway. Offshore safety work had taught him to trust his gut, and right now it told him this flight wouldn't be easy. Still, he had promised himself he'd be home to Sophie in 3 days. No delays, no excuses. Victoria Lane, dressed in a tailored cream suit that looked absurd against the restless clouds, strode across the tarmac with the poise of someone who thought weather, like people, could be commanded. Her assistant hustled behind her, juggling files and an expensive leather bag, but Victoria didn't slow down. Her eyes were sharp, impatient, already fixed on the deal waiting for her across the Pacific. They boarded without a word, two strangers inhabiting different worlds, sharing only a narrow aisle and the uneasy hum of engines cutting through the wind. Half an hour into the flight, turbulence hit like a hammer. The plane jolted violently, throwing papers into the air and coffee against the ceiling. Victoria gripped the armrest, but Ethan, calm despite the chaos, scanned the cockpit door. He didn't like the way the engines sputtered between gusts of rain. When alarms blared and the pilot's voice cracked through the intercom, "Brace for impact!" He didn't think, he just moved. The ocean came up to meet them faster than thought. The crash was a symphony of tearing metal and screaming wind. Salt water slammed into Ethan's lungs as the fuselage cracked open. His training roared to life. Unbuckle, locate exits, orient underwater. He surfaced in darkness and rain, shouting through the roar for survivors. A flash of white, Victoria's suit, flailing in the black water. He swam hard, fighting the waves, dragging her toward a floating wing. She coughed, half-conscious, terrified, but alive. Hours blurred into survival instinct. The storm spat them onto the sand of a nameless island, the plane wreckage a fading silhouette against dawn. Victoria collapsed, trembling, mascara streaked with seawater and fear. Ethan checked her pulse, then stood, scanning the tree line. Jungle. No smoke, no lights, no sign of rescue. "You're safe," he said, more to steady her than himself. "But we're not going anywhere yet." Victoria tried to push herself up, still clinging to the illusion of control. "We need to call for help. I'll have a satellite phone in my bag." Her voice wavered when she realized the bag was somewhere at the bottom of the ocean. Ethan didn't answer. He was already stripping branches for a shelter, his hands steady, his breath measured. Victoria, shivering and furious, followed him with her eyes as if trying to reconcile this soaked, scarred stranger with the power he suddenly seemed to hold. "Do you even know who I am?" she demanded, half to hide her fear. Ethan didn't look up. "Doesn't matter here." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of salt and broken vegetation. Victoria hugged herself, the CEO who commanded boardrooms now reduced to wet silk and shaking knees. Ethan built a fire with the patience of a man who'd done it 100 times, the spark catching in the damp air like hope refusing to die. For the first time in years, Victoria Lane didn't know what came next, and for Ethan Cole, that uncertainty was nothing new. But this time, it wasn't just his life on the line. The jungle rustled with unseen life. Somewhere far off, something moved. The fire crackled weakly, sending a thin line of smoke into the humid air. Victoria Lane sat cross-legged on the sand, trying to smooth her ruined suit jacket with shaking hands, as if restoring its crisp lines could somehow restore her world. But the jungle around them only hummed louder. Insects, distant calls of birds, or worse, the steady rhythm of waves hitting the shore. Ethan Cole knelt beside the flame, feeding it careful handfuls of dry palm fronds. His face, lit by orange glow, was calm but unreadable. He'd built a lean-to against a fallen tree, crude but solid. The man worked like he'd done this 100 times before. Victoria broke the silence first. "I'm not staying out here. We just wait for rescue, right? They'll come." Ethan didn't look at her. "They'll search near the crash site, but storms scatter wreckage. Could be days, could be longer." Her breath caught. "Days? Maybe weeks," he said simply, and pressed the kindling deeper into the coals. The words landed heavier than the rain still dripping off the trees. Victoria had built an empire on schedules and precision. The idea of waiting, of being powerless, made her chest tighten. By midday, the heat was merciless. Ethan stripped his soaked shirt, the sun revealing scars across his shoulders, evidence of a life spent in hard work and harder luck. Victoria followed reluctantly as he scouted for fresh water, muttering under her breath about missing contracts, angry investors, and ruined meetings. "Slow down," she called, heels sinking into the sand. Ethan turned, holding back a sharp reply. "Lose the shoes. You're going to hurt yourself." "I don't walk barefoot," she snapped. "Then you don't walk far," he said, and kept going. The arrogance in her tone didn't bother him. What bothered him was how pale she looked in the heat, how her lips had begun to dry. She'd never last without guidance, even if she refused to admit it. When he found a freshwater stream trickling down from a ridge, he cupped it in his hands and held it out. "Drink." She hesitated. "What if it's dirty?" "It's clean," he said flatly. "Trust me, or don't, and pass out." The water was cold and sharp, shocking against her throat. She hated that he was right, and hated even more that he didn't gloat about it. Later, while gathering fruit near the tree line, Victoria reached for a cluster of bright red berries. Ethan's hand shot out fast, gripping her wrist. "Don't." "They look fine." "They'll kill you." His voice was low, steady. No lecture, no judgment, just fact. Her chest tightened in something like gratitude, though she hid it behind a glare. "You could have told me sooner. Thought a CEO knew everything." That earned him a flash of anger, and, to her own surprise, a reluctant laugh. "You're impossible." As dusk fell, they returned to the shelter with a small haul of edible fruit. Ethan built the fire higher, its glow beating back the darkness. Victoria sat closer to the heat than she'd like to admit, her damp clothes clinging to her like a reminder of her vulnerability. "You have a family?" she asked suddenly, surprising even herself. Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the flames. "A daughter, Sophie. She's 7. His voice softened on the number. "Lost her mom 3 years ago." The air between them shifted. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, she wasn't the CEO of anything, just a woman sitting across from a man carrying his own private storm. She stared into the fire. "I grew up in a house so big I didn't see my parents for days. Nannies, tutors, drivers, everything but love. Guess that's how you end up running a company instead of having a life." Ethan didn't answer right away. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the dark. "Maybe you just haven't found what matters yet." Victoria looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. She wanted to argue, to dismiss it as some rugged man cliché, but the words lodged under her ribs. The night was quiet, but not peaceful. Somewhere deep in the jungle, something howled. Victoria shifted closer to the fire instinctively, her eyes darting to the shadows. Ethan noticed, though he didn't tease her. "Stay close. The island's not empty." Victoria glanced at him, trying to read whether he was joking. But his face stayed calm, his posture alert. And for the first time, she realized he wasn't just surviving for himself. He was surviving for someone waiting at home. And now, whether she liked it or not, he was surviving for her too. The darkness pressed closer around them, and Victoria wondered if daylight would feel any safer. Dawn broke in shades of gold and gray, spreading light across the sand like a secret revealed too early. Victoria woke to the sound of rustling palms and the rhythmic scrape of stone against wood. Ethan was already up, crouched over the embers of last night's fire, sharpening a makeshift spear. His shoulders glistened with sweat in the humid air, every movement measured and deliberate. Victoria pushed herself upright, brushing sand from her tangled hair. Her cream suit, now a dirt-streaked, salt-stiff ruin, hung loose around her frame. The CEO who once glided through glass towers now looked like any other castaway. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice still rough with sleep. Breakfast, Ethan said simply. He didn't look up, didn't wait for her approval. She followed him reluctantly to the waterline, watching as he waded into the shallows with the spear. He moved like someone who trusted the world to make sense if you paid attention. No sudden movements, no wasted effort. A flash of silver beneath the water, a quick thrust, and a fish wriggled at the tip of the spear. Victoria blinked. That was fast. Hungry people learn quick, he said, setting the catch on the sand. You're learning too, whether you want to or not. The morning passed in work she never imagined herself doing, gathering palm leaves for shade, rinsing fruit, tending the fire. She hated how clumsy she felt, but every time she stumbled, Ethan's quiet patience disarmed her more than any sharp retort could. By noon, the heat pressed down like a weight. Ethan showed her how to build a fire from scratch, striking stone against steel until sparks leapt. She fumbled the first few tries, swearing under her breath until the dry fibers finally smoked and caught. Her grin was wide, almost childlike. Not bad, Ethan said. Coming from you, I'll take that as a standing ovation. It startled them both. The way they laughed, the sound breaking through the thick, tense air of the island. For a moment, it wasn't about survival or fear. It was just two people sharing something real. But the island didn't let them forget danger for long. Late afternoon clouds gathered dark and low, warning of another storm. They reinforced their shelter with palm trunks, Ethan's steady hands guiding hers. But while searching for drier ground, Victoria slipped on mossy stone and twisted her ankle hard. The pain was sharp, stealing her breath. I'm fine, she insisted, trying to stand, but her leg buckled beneath her. Stop, Ethan said firmly, crouching beside her. Without waiting for permission, he swept her into his arms. Put me down, she protested, though her voice was softer than her words. Sure, he said dryly, once you want to crawl through 2 miles of mud. The jungle was heavy with damp air, leaves dripping in steady rhythm. Ethan carried her for hours, his grip sure and unwavering, while Victoria fought a strange mix of embarrassment and something warmer she didn't dare name. She'd spent her life making sure she never needed anyone. Now she was depending on a stranger, and the feeling was terrifying, and oddly safe. When they finally reached a small clearing on higher ground, Ethan set her gently on a flat rock. He tore a strip from his own shirt to bind her ankle. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as he checked for swelling. You always this bossy? She murmured, half to distract herself from the pain. You always this stubborn? He countered, not looking up. She wanted to snap back, but the tension in his jaw stopped her. This wasn't just about survival. This was about Sophie. She saw it now, in the way his eyes never fully rested, in how his hands worked with urgency. He wasn't fighting for his life alone. He was fighting to get home to the little girl who still needed him. As the storm rolled in, they huddled under the shelter, rain pounding like fists on the palm leaves. Their shoulders brushed, then stayed close. In the flickering firelight, Victoria studied the lines of Ethan's face. The scars, the wear, the strength that didn't need to announce itself. You miss her, Victoria said softly. Every minute, he replied, voice low. She's why I do everything. Why I can't fail. Something in Victoria's chest shifted, a quiet ache where walls used to be. She thought of her empty penthouse, the assistants who called her ma'am, the boardroom full of men who respected her title but never really saw her. Sounds like she's lucky to have you, Victoria whispered. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing past the polished surface she always showed the world. The rain softened, but neither of them moved. For a moment, it wasn't about rescue, or business, or even survival. It was about connection, raw and human and terrifying in its simplicity. And just when the silence felt too full to bear, Victoria smiled faintly, trying to push away the weight of it. If we can't go back, must I marry you? Ethan's laugh rumbled low and warm, breaking the tension. Careful, I might say yes. But neither of them forgot the question, or the way it didn't feel like a joke anymore. The storm passed, but something else had taken root, quiet and undeniable. The next morning dawned sharp and clear, as if the storm had scoured the sky clean. Ethan woke to find Victoria already awake, sitting near the fire, turning a palm leaf slowly in her hands. Her ankle was bound tightly, but the swelling hadn't gone down much. "You should rest," Ethan said, crouching beside her. "I can rest when I'm back in my office," she murmured, eyes on the horizon. But there was no glass tower there, no waiting boardroom, only endless ocean glinting under the sun. For days, their world shrank to simple tasks, tending the fire, fishing, keeping the shelter dry. Victoria surprised herself by learning quickly, and surprising Ethan too. She caught her first fish on the third try, grinning like a child as she held it up, hair tangled and eyes bright. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about shareholders or deals. She was thinking about eating, about laughing, about surviving. One afternoon, while Ethan was reinforcing the shelter, Victoria limped to the edge of the beach. The vastness of the ocean stretched out, unbroken and merciless. She thought of her life before, her penthouse, her expensive shoes lined in perfect rows, her phone that never stopped buzzing. She thought of how little any of it mattered here. "Hey!" Ethan's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood near the fire, pointing upward. A thin plume of smoke curled into the air. Not theirs. A rescue plane, small and silver, skimmed the clouds in the distance. Victoria's heart leapt. "They're here!" Ethan grabbed the half-burned palm leaves and threw them into the flames, fanning it high. They tore through their meager supplies, burning anything that would smoke black and heavy. Victoria waved both arms, shouting into the empty sky until her voice cracked. The plane dipped once, just enough to make Ethan's chest tighten, then banked hard and circled lower. Relief hit like a wave, so strong it almost knocked Victoria off her feet. They were found. Hours later, sitting in the back of a rescue chopper, the roar of engines in her ears, Victoria stared out at the shrinking island. A lump sat heavy in her throat. She should have felt nothing but joy, the promise of hot showers, clean clothes, and civilization. Yet she couldn't shake the strange pull of what they were leaving behind. Ethan didn't say much. He kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, on home, on Sophie. When the helicopter touched down at a regional base, medics swarmed them, taking vitals, offering blankets and food. Victoria tried to thank Ethan, but the words came out thin and awkward. By the time they reached the mainland, her world came rushing back at full speed. Her assistant arrived in a sleek black car, cell phone in hand, voice trembling with panic and relief. Her father's lawyer called within minutes. The board had questions. The merger was back on schedule. Ethan stood off to the side, a duffel slung over his shoulder, waiting for his own transport, a beat-up truck sent by his company. He looked out of place among the polished executives who appeared to usher Victoria away, but not out of place to her. For a moment, their eyes met across the noise of the tarmac. No words passed, only a look that said more than either dared to speak aloud. Then someone from her team pulled her toward the car. "Mr. Cole?" a rescue coordinator asked. "We've arranged transport to the hospital for a checkup." "I'm fine," Ethan said quietly. His thoughts were already home, already with Sophie. 2 hours later, Victoria sat in her penthouse, staring at the glittering skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her ankle was elevated, her phone buzzing non-stop. Contracts, press inquiries, congratulatory messages. But the only thing she could hear was Ethan's voice, calm in the firelight, steady in the rain, laughing when she asked if she must marry him. Across town, Ethan knelt beside Sophie's bed, brushing her hair back as she slept. She woke just long enough to whisper, "You came back, Daddy." "Always," he said, voice thick with emotion. That night, while the city hummed around them, both Ethan and Victoria lay awake in separate worlds, haunted by the same memory. Not the crash, not the fear, but the quiet moments on the island when everything felt stripped down to what really mattered. The next morning, Victoria walked into her office and was met by her boardroom lined with men in tailored suits. all congratulating her survival before launching straight into deal points. "You'll need to put this episode behind you," one of them said smoothly. "It's a distraction. You have an image to maintain." Victoria nodded outwardly, but something inside her recoiled. They were talking about survival as if it were a minor inconvenience, not a life-altering truth. And somewhere across the city, Ethan assumed she'd already forgotten him. Neither of them admitted how much they missed the island. Or each other. 3 weeks passed, but the island clung to Victoria Lane like salt in her hair that no amount of shampoo could wash out. She returned to her routines, the early board meetings, the glass elevators, the endless rhythm of voices talking about billions as if human lives were footnotes. Yet every time she looked out from her office on the 52nd floor, she saw more than a skyline. She saw a beach lit by firelight. The board wanted to celebrate her return as if it were a PR stunt. They arranged a high-profile press conference to finalize the Pacific Energy merger, an event designed to assure investors that Victoria Lane was back, unshaken and unstoppable. But she was shaken, just not in a way anyone could see. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole had slipped back into his quiet world. Days on offshore rigs, nights with Sophie. He told her bedtime stories about brave princesses and kind strangers, never about storms or plane crashes. But sometimes, when Sophie fell asleep, he sat by her door and thought about a woman with sharp eyes who learned how to make fire with her bare hands. He assumed she'd moved on, back to her world of power and wealth. And why wouldn't she? Their lives didn't fit. The island had been an accident, a fragile pause in 2 very different stories. The morning of the press conference, Victoria dressed in a steel gray suit, her armor polished and precise. Cameras flashed as she stepped onto the stage of a crowded ballroom, executives lining the front row, journalists stacked in the back. "Today marks a milestone for Lane Global Industries," the moderator began. "Miss Lane will outline the details of our groundbreaking merger." But when Victoria approached the podium, she didn't open her notes. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow. She saw the faces of her board, expectant and calculating, but all she could think of was Ethan kneeling by the fire, binding her injured ankle with quiet care. She began to speak, not about numbers or contracts, but about something no one expected. "I was stranded on an island," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I thought I knew what mattered. I thought control, power, and success defined me. But out there, none of it mattered. Out there, I had to depend on someone I didn't know, and he taught me what it means to be alive." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reporters raised their cameras higher. Her board members shifted uneasily. But Victoria didn't stop. "This man saved my life," she continued. "He didn't care who I was or what I owned. He only cared about keeping me alive, about getting back to his daughter, who he loves more than anything. He reminded me that life isn't about mergers or markets. It's about people. It's about love, courage, and kindness." The moderator tried to interject, but Victoria stepped away from the podium entirely. Her voice rang out over the stunned silence. "Ethan Cole," she said, scanning the room as if he might appear from thin air. "If you're here," her voice softened just slightly, "if we can't go back, must I marry you?" A gasp swept through the room, journalists clicking feverishly, executives exchanging horrified glances, and at the very back of the ballroom, standing near the doors in worn jeans and a clean work shirt, was Ethan. He'd come because she'd left a message with Sophie's favorite stuffed rabbit, delivered to his doorstep. "Be there if you can." The crowd parted as Victoria stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking against polished marble. Cameras swiveled, following her every move. Ethan stood still, jaw tight, unsure if he should even be there. This was her world, not his. But when she reached him, the room faded. "You didn't have to say that," Ethan murmured, a hint of a smile breaking through his disbelief. "I wanted to," Victoria said, her voice trembling now, stripped of all pretense. "Because it's true. I don't want to go back to my old life. I don't want to pretend the island didn't happen. She reached for his hand, and for the first time in years, Victoria Lane, the untouchable CEO, looked vulnerable, almost fragile. "You don't have to marry me," she whispered, echoing her own words with a new meaning. "But I'd love it if you did." The cameras clicked. The ballroom erupted into chaos. But in the center of it all, Ethan didn't hear a thing. He smiled, that quiet, steady smile she'd seen on the island, and pulled her into his arms. At the edge of the room, Sophie peeked around the doorframe, holding the stuffed rabbit Victoria had sent. Her eyes lit up as she ran to her father. Ethan knelt, catching her in one arm, while Victoria crouched beside them, laughing through tears. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the deal, not the flashing cameras, not the shocked board. Only them. The island had brought them together. But this time, they wouldn't need to be stranded to stay that way. The late afternoon sun spilled molten gold across the small coastal town where Ethan and Victoria had chosen to meet after weeks apart. A soft ocean breeze carried the smell of salt and pine as gulls circled lazily overhead. The world felt calm, no storms, no crashes, just the hum of ordinary life. Victoria stood by the pier, her sharp business suit replaced with a simple linen dress, hair loose and glowing in the sun. She watched Ethan approach, his stride steady but his heart visibly racing. Sophie, clutching a stuffed dolphin, darted forward to hug her father's leg before shyly smiling up at Victoria. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was warm, charged with the weight of everything unsaid. "So," Ethan began, voice low but sure. "No rescue helicopters, no deserted islands, just us deciding what happens next." Victoria's lips curved into a rare, unguarded smile. "Scary, isn't it? No crises to hide behind, just life." Ethan crouched to Sophie's level. "Sweetheart, remember that promise I made about not letting work keep us apart anymore?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "You said we'd be a team, always." Victoria's eyes softened as she knelt too, meeting Sophie eye to eye. "I think your dad and I are learning how to do that, together." The three of them walked to a weathered bench overlooking the harbor. Boats rocked gently against the docks, ropes creaking with the tide. Ethan turned to Victoria, taking a breath as if preparing to leap again, not off a cliff this time, but into something far scarier, permanence. "No more running, Victoria. You don't have to go back to a boardroom you hate. I don't have to take contracts halfway across the world just to feel useful. We can build something real. Not perfect, not easy, but ours." Victoria looked out at the horizon. Not for escape this time, but to picture it. A life on their own terms. No island forced them here, no disaster bound them together. Just choice. A faint laugh escaped her lips, shaky but full of relief. "Do you even realize how terrifyingly normal that sounds?" Ethan grinned. "Terrifying's kind of our thing." Sophie climbed between them, small hands gripping theirs. "Does this mean we're staying together? Like, forever?" Victoria's answer was instant, steady. "Yes, if your dad's brave enough to jump." Ethan squeezed Victoria's hand. "Already did, just waiting for you to catch me." The last light of day wrapped around them like an embrace. No applause, no audience, just a promise sealed under an open sky where no one dictated their future but themselves.